Hey, Father Mitch here. So this video that I'm about to step into is by Paul Vanderklay, who's one of my favorite YouTubers and a guy that I really respect a lot. And it's him making a video about another guy that I really like, who is Jonathan Pageau. And Jonathan Pageau is an orthodox icon carver and a symbologist. And I enjoyed the video a great deal, but I think that they're both missing a lot. And I think they're missing a lot because they don't fully understand how important and how vital, really, ritual is to the human experience, to evolution, to the human condition, all of it. And so I want to step into this video not as criticism, but as what Paul would call a conversation. I recommend these books all the time. Much of what I'm going to cover comes from the work of Dr. Matt Rossano. He would not tell you this, but I will tell you that I believe he is the world's greatest living expert on the evolution of religion and on the importance of ritual. The two books by him that I recommend that everyone read, and that is Supernatural Selection, How Religion Evolved, and Ritual in Human Evolution and Religion. These books aren't cheap. They're hard to, this one especially is hard to find. It's a scholarly book. This one probably a little bit easier to find. But a lot of what I'm covering today are found in those books. And I would say if I had to boil everything down that I'm going to say today, I would, in its essence, be religion is ritual. And without ritual, there is no humanity. Now, I realize that's a bold statement, but there it is. Now, without further ado, let's step into this video, and I'll respond to their points as they come up.
Hi, this is Paul. Jonathan, today it's Friday. I usually record my Monday videos on Friday. Jonathan released not a very long video on ritual. And this is one of the most interesting aspects right now in terms of this whole conversation of belief in God and let's say efficacy of religion. And so let's it's just a short video. Let's watch it together.
Make fun of the strange hat of a pope or of a bishop, and you think that that's funny, but somehow you still understand why you need a uniform to play sports. You know, it's like these are all different levels of the same reality. And religion and religious behavior is because they tend to want to isolate religious behavior from other human behavior. And so they have this little category here called religion, and it's broken off from all the other things that humans do.
And we've talked about this a lot. There's sort of religion S, which is sort of the secular definition of religion, and New Atheism sort of capitalized on this and said, yeah, religion is this specific thing. Now, what's going on in Israel and Gaza is, of course, not just about religion, but religion is not uninvolved either, because religion pervades life. Religion is the default operating system about how our ideals are pursued. So one of the things I think about as I'm watching this Gaza business going on is with the recession of modernity, what was sort of nicely compartmentalized as religion that compartmentalization is going to be tougher and tougher to maintain, and that's going to be difficult for us. In some ways, secularism created a weak Christian-y boilerplate that much of the world could sort of work from.
Now, here Paul mentions the Christianity boilerplate. And I think what he misses here is that what really happened was we took the ritual out. And we made Christianity to some extent Gnostic. Gnosticism was the first and greatest heresy that the church refuted. And what we do when we take out ritual, which is the embodiment of worship, in other words, it's bringing the philosophical, the mental, the intellectual into the body and actually moving your body. Then when we remove that from it, then we turn it basically into Gnosticism. In other words, what we're saying is we can just sort of use our minds and think our way through. The ancients were very clear that mind, body, and spirit are one. And so they must all be united in practice. This is one of the reasons why the church insists on the physical resurrection of the body. Because the body, the mind, and the spirit are one, and they cannot be divorced from one another. We're going to step into how ritual works more in my next commentary as we go forward, but not put the cart before the horse.
And it certainly had its deficiencies, but even, let's say the segmentalization of religion over in a corner for all of the difficulties that possessed, there were some advantages to it too. And so you could have fairly functioning societies, often, again with Tom Holland's argument, often with a floor of commonly held Christian beliefs that afforded a lot for the society. All of that is breaking down now. And so all of these conversations about Christian nationalism, Islamism, and all of this is all coming to the fore because modernity continues to recede. And ritual then comes into that. But ritual, the fight over ritual was the fight over religious ritual was a far older fight. And of course, that fight is deep within Protestantism, because Protestantism, as a precursor of the Enlightenment, cast a whole lot of doubt on the efficacy of certain, what today would be called religious rituals, let's say the Catholic Mass.
Okay, Paul, so ritual is prime, not belief. Now this is very difficult, but we've got to get to this point. When you talk about receding modernity, Paul, what you're really discussing here is what happens when ritual is abandoned. In the same way that you can't use a tree to stay warm, you have to take the tree and cut it down and split it into firewood and then let it be seasoned before you can burn it and stay warm. Pro-social sentiments also need to be processed. We need to begin to think of psychological states as resources. Rituals are the way that we process pro-social sentiments and make them useful in the same way that a tree is processed to make it useful, to make firewood or wood for furniture or something. You can't do anything, really, without self-control, either personally or as a group. And so everyone has to have some self-control so that we can have patience and we can share and we can exercise diplomacy and use positive emotions and tamp down negative emotions. We can delay our gratification and do those sorts of things. and rituals are great at doing that. And we won't go into all the studies. There are hundreds of studies referenced in Matt Rossano's book, but we'll go through just a couple of these. There is the McNeil study, or McNeil material. McNeil showed that communal dancing, chanting, marching all produce euphoric mental states that bond participants, resulting in effective joint action. There's the Valdesolo, Ouyang, and Desteno study. Ritualized actions involving synchronized movements facilitate joint cooperative endeavors. There's the Kabat-Zinn study. Contemplative ritual actions, such as meditation, can increase pain tolerance. There are 4 studies listed that show that people who move together tend to like each other more, to perceive one another as more similar, to believe they share the same values, and that they are more willing to extend compassion to each other. There's a study from 2013, Fisher et al. Moving together is bonding together. Ritual activities produced profound feelings of group unity and shared sacred values. There were 2 studies listed that demonstrated that rosary recitation causes entrainment of autonomic nervous system function. In other words, breathing and heart rates tended to synchronize among the participants, creating the conditions for strong emotional bonding. Rituals are psychotechnology of the highest regard. So I actually emailed Dr. Rossano and asked him for his input and how I could make the video more robust. And he suggested that I point out at this time that rituals don't just process pro-social emotions. They cultivate, they create pro-social emotions, and make that absolutely clear. So, for example, you might have an encounter at a dance where you meet someone and you dance all night. And through the dancing, you have pro-social emotions which allow you to connect. And then that allows you to communicate, and thus begins the seed that is love. Okay? And you say, I love her because we danced together, right? Cinderella, right? So she falls in love with the prince because of the dance, or through the dance. So it's not a stretch, and in fact, it's not a stretch at all to say that we don't go to Mass because we are Christians. We are Christians because we go to Mass. There's this thing in the Catholic Church where we say, taste and see that the Lord is good. We have to eat the food to receive the nourishment. So, again, we don't go to church because we're Christians. We're Christians because we go to church together.
So because of that, the religious behavior can appear arbitrary, superstitious, ridiculous.
That is the dismissal of it. It's arbitrary. And arbitrary is a key word here, because now as modernity recedes, what this little corner, Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke have all sort of forced us to recognize, and I think this is a big part of sort of Peterson's breaking into, was that all of what had sort of been dismissed as arbitrary, this religious stuff, not so arbitrary. Tom Holland's work, same thing, not so arbitrary. And of course, Jonathan Peugeot's work has been, not arbitrary. The patterns are not arbitrary.
Sometimes also people want to reduce religion to a set of things that you believe, rather than understanding it as a coherent set of behaviors and beliefs that kind of go together.
Now, the video I was working on, but sort of sometimes I'm just not feeling it, even though I think I should do it. The video on confessionality. So on one hand, you've got Jordan Peterson saying Religion isn't just a set of propositions. When Pierce Morgan is going after him about whether or not he believes in God, and Jordan is basically hitting back against propositionalism. And Kristen Kobes Dumais on the Holy Post with Sky Jatani says, basically, she says, she doesn't say it very well because she doesn't have the language. If she'd listened to more videos from this little corner, she'd have better language with which to engage these issues. But basically, people are trying to corner her with respect to propositional issues, and she doesn't want that because what Jonathan just said is true. Religion goes beyond propositional, and that's where religion is, our ritual is much more part of the other three P's. It's procedural, it's participatory, it's perspectival. See, I got them all.
I think what Jonathan and Paul, you guys are missing is you need clear definitions because you're both conflating different things together instead of seeing them as unique. And so let's arrive first at three definitions. So there are routines and there are ritualized behaviors, and then there are rituals. So a routine is something like brushing your teeth, something that you do repeatedly because it has known benefits and it becomes sort of a habit. And so many times you can say to yourself, gosh, I drove to work and I don't even remember the drive. Did I brush my teeth or not? Did I take my medicine or not? Because you've so habituated it that you did it automatically and you don't give it any thought, right? That is a routine. Now, a ritualized behavior is something that has become ritualized across time. It has a benefit, but it has also another character. And you might say that a ritual is almost like a ritualized behavior is something like what you've mentioned in this video, what Jonathan mentions in his video. A wolf showing his throat to avoid mortal combat or combat to the death. The mating rituals of dancing rituals of cranes and so forth. Humans engage in those as well. Those are ritualized behaviors. But make no mistake, ritualized behaviors also have a definite purpose. They are purposeful. In other words, it's easy to see quickly the purpose, the connection between the behavior and its outcome and what it's designed to do. In other words, let's say threat displays by animals avoid actual death, and we can clearly see that in the behavior from a distance. Humans engage in these too, but the difference is in a ritual, which is the third, routine, ritualized behavior, and ritual. A ritual is entirely different. Its character is completely different, and at first glance it may seem like it, and sometimes the lines do blur a bit. But think of it this way. Animals may have ritualized behaviors, but they don't have rituals. A true ritual is unique to the human being. So, cranes may have their mating dances, but they don't have weddings. Okay? Now, here's a great example. You can often distinguish a true ritual by its meaninglessness. Not its meaning, but its meaninglessness. It's not obvious exactly what is going on in a true ritual. So here's an example. When I say Mass, before I touch the host, I wash my hands. And I say, wash away my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. And as I say this, a little water goes across my hands and I dry them with a towel. And it's a very perfunctory washing. So I'm not actually washing away anything. In the literal sense, there is no soap. And I know perfectly well that God can hear me. So why in the world would I repeat myself? Iniquity is sin. And so why would I say, wash away my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin? And so when you see someone perform a ritual, there are going to be many, many aspects, if not all of it, that don't make any sense at all. When a military man plays taps, then there are going to be stylized movements of the hands and of the body that are not required and have no distinct purpose. This is a distinguishing feature of a true ritual. Only humans do rituals, not animals. So another thing that Dr. Rossano suggested I add to the video is to make it more clear the difference between routines, ritualized behaviors, and rituals. The average person, especially someone who doesn't appreciate rituals and is not religious, they can actually say that I'm making things up, that there is no clear distinction, and that rituals are just ritualized behaviors. So let's make the distinctions absolutely clear. So a routine, like brushing your teeth, is mindless, its purpose is clear, and it has no cosmic significance. So in other words, you brush your teeth, you don't really think about it. You can brush your teeth and the next day say, did I brush my teeth last night? You don't know. You're an automatic pilot. You drive to work. Sometimes, you get to work and you just sort of like wake up and you go, how did I get here again? That's the way a routine is. So again, a routine is mindless. It's very clear its purpose, but it has no cosmic significance. A ritualized behavior is somewhat more intentional. You know what you're doing it on purpose, and you're more engaged with the activity. Its purpose is mostly clear. Sometimes ritualized behaviors can be a little opaque. Why is that crane dancing? But it only takes a moment or a little bit of thought to understand that it's to attract a mate, and it has a very relatively clear purpose. And again, it has no cosmic significance. It doesn't affect the entire universe as far as its significance. Neither does brushing your teeth, let's say. Now, a ritual is very high on the mindfulness scale. It's deliberate, very slow, and you're very, very engaged in the activity. However, its purpose is unclear. Now, we're talking about how rituals have a practical purpose. It's just not at all clear why a priest would, let's say, wash his hands and say, wash away my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin, and say it twice. Okay? But the cosmic significance is high. And that's what makes rituals so much different. The cosmic significance. In order for a ritual to be efficacious, then everyone needs to agree on the cosmic order. As Jordan Peterson would say, on the hierarchy. What is the hierarchy? And that's what the ritual in some sense does. It tells us our place in the universe. Animals do not do that. Animals do not intentionally seek their place in the cosmic order.
It's all of those right there, and in that way, religion is in some ways deeper than just the propositional. But the propositional is itself vitally important and useful, and that's why propositional isn't going away.
I found that the best way to understand religion from a secularist perspective, or even from a purely materialist perspective, is to see it as an extension of other types of behaviors, and even, I would say, as an extension or similar in nature to some behaviors that animals have. And so
now this is a gutsy move on Jonathan's part, because I've noticed among some of the ortho bros, there's still, even after the modernist fundamentalist wars that tended to focus on evolution, this is sort of scaling up from animals to people. It gets that certain people get real touchy with respect to that.
Animals do not intentionally seek their place in the cosmic order.
One of the things that I've noticed is that looking at the way that animals ritualize behavior is actually a good way for humans to understand why it is that we ritualize behavior and what it is that ritualizing behavior can do. And so the first thing to understand is that actually all behavior is ritualized. That is, anything which is moving towards a goal has to be ordered. And so if you don't like the word behavior, let's just use the word ordered. So ordered behavior will happen as you move towards a goal. So if you...
Now this stuff is super helpful, what he lays out here, and it's basic and it's right.
Actually, Paul, it's not right. Okay. Rituals manage psychological and social resources. Conflating the three types is confusing rather than helpful. Again, there is no purpose for the priest to wash his hands without soap before touching the body of Christ.
And once you do something, let's say there's a goal you're pursuing, and you've tried to pursue that goal 3 different ways, and you found one way to be better than the other 2 ways. So then you repeat the goal. And children do this all the time. Children watch their parents. Their parents have tried things a bunch of different ways. They repeat it. Talk to people who have learned to cook from their parents, and their parents say, "I always do it this way," and so they do it that way. This is so deep in us, and so Jonathan's description is right.
Have a purpose. The things you do, you'll probably experiment a little bit at the outset, but at some point you'll realize that, if I want to get to the river, this is the best way to go. At first, maybe I'll zigzag, I'll do this, but then a trail will set itself up in the forest to go to the river, and then that behavior, going from the village to the river, for example, will become ritualized in the sense that it will become ordered and will have kind of reduced itself to its best line, you could say, to get to the river. And so
now, and remember, he begins sort of saying this line between religion and not religion in the secular worldview is not what you think it is. And I often bring up the Greeks, let's say, because we would look at the Greeks and see their temples and see their sacrifices and see their stories of the gods. And we would look at the Greeks and just about everybody in the ancient world and say they're highly religious. And in some ways, they would say, religion, what's that? We make sacrifices to the gods, we follow these sacred paths, we do these things, we eat this way, we do all of these things because this brings us favor from the gods, and then we find success. And this is where you get into, let's say, God number 1, where this is just the Arenic God, and these are the rules of how things work. And so if you do these things, you will prosper. And it's sort of an open arena. And once the rules are discovered, if you do these things, it will go well. And technology is within this too. And so the line between technology and ritual is not very far. Drew Johnson, who's written on some of this stuff, once made the comment that part of what is not fully captured, let's say, in the Torah, is actually all of the procedural knowledge that went into, let's say, the sacrificial system. Now, when I say that, you can read plenty of procedural knowledge in the Torah about the sacrificial system, but one of the things that you recognize, if you ever try to assemble something with enormous detail and precision just from written text or an audible text or an audible description, there's so much you don't know. And that's especially true in terms of religious matters. Now, when you look at something like, so the orthodoxy, Catholicism, these very ancient traditions place a lot of stock in succession. Now, part of what is behind succession is that, just like with the child and the parent, you learn a lot of procedural knowledge, of perspectival knowledge, of participatory knowledge by being there. You also learn propositional, but by being there. And so if you watch, let's say, someone from a highly sacramental tradition celebrate the Mass, the Eucharist, just go to, sometimes, for a while, the Saint Elijah in Oklahoma City had their priest was doing a real cool study on the Gospel of John. And so that got into my YouTube algorithm. So every now and then their service will pop up. And I don't watch very much of it, but I'm just sort of fascinated by, have the doors and they go in and they go out. All of this, if you were to sort of devote all of that to text, so much would be lost, because one of the things that you pick up on is how to walk, how to move the things, where they go, what feels right. I mean, that's where combinatorial explosiveness meets the limitations of a defined text. And so what Drew Johnson was, the comment that he was making about the Old Testament is that in some ways, if you could go back in time and watch the priest at the altar of the temple, in terms of its procedure, it might not be that far from, let's say, a surgeon in an operating room or a tech worker doing assembly in a clean room. All of the procedures are directed in order to achieve an outcome.
Again, we are confusing our definitions and making things more difficult to understand rather than less so. Surgeons stitch bodies together. Priests stitch communities together.
And it's exactly the question of the efficacy of the outcome and the causal linkage that deism and sort of the clockmaker universe basically looked at religion and says, is this like technology? Does this achieve its outcome?
Yes. Ritual is psychosocial technology. It is resource management. Protestants take it for granted. And so, unfortunately, it's may not be Gnosticism, but it's certainly, to my mind, on the pathway towards Gnosticism. What Protestants take for granted, sacramentalists do not. We do the ritual, we build the social and the psychological capital that allows us to go forward in a different way than in the Protestant fashion.
So this is something which happens in all types of behaviors, whether it is, the way to hunt or the way to prepare food. All of these will become ordered, not like 100% order, but there'll always be a little aspect of variability on the margins, but the behavior will become ordered. And so you
can see this in music, because if you, let's say, watch a student, you can see, let's say, musical apostolic succession in a lineage of artists, but you always know, just as Jonathan said, there are just these little variants. And of course, Jonathan would be more aware of this because, part of the reason he went to Africa was to learn craft. Okay. And so artists know this, and we also know this in terms of even the propositional teachers of one another. You always pick up something from your teacher.
So I think that you're both really missing it, or at best only getting half of the importance of ritual. Both of you see ritual as a cost reduction, only a cost reduction, because you're conflating routine with ritual. Routines prevent waste. fair enough. But rituals accrue psychosocial resources. This is why John Vervaeke is trying to create circling, or he's trying to create a secular ritual that will help bond people together who don't want to engage in religious rituals. But I actually don't think it's possible to do that fully and completely. Now, I'm not going to go into details, but if you actually look at Matt Rossano's book, just on the surface of it, Supernatural Selection, the problem here is that you reduce selfishness really only with scrutiny. So public scrutiny in general increases pro-social behavior. But the thing is that it works better if you believe that all of the ancients are watching you. All of your ancestors are watching you. And it works even better when you believe that God is watching you. I don't think it's a stretch to say that rituals work better when there is a supernatural element.
You could say that when you order behavior, the more you order it, you do it in order to avoid the cost of the behavior. So, it's like if I could get to the river by going all around and going in circles and doing all this, and then I get to the river, and it's like, okay, but that's very costly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And so what I'll do is that I'll start to order my behavior in order to reduce the cost that it has, in terms of energy, in terms of time, and all of that, and in terms of consequences, you could say.
And when you look at the beaten path from the village to the river, in many ways, that beaten path is an artifact of the ritual of going from the village to the river.
And so you can imagine that this is something that happens even in animal ritual behavior. So think of, for example, ritualized conflict between
You can find game trails, okay? Same thing.
Animals. The animals will ritualize their conflict and will ritualize their capacity to recognize who is the superior and who is the inferior. And they will do that to avoid the cost, because if they go all out and they fight it out, then that becomes very costly, both for the one that ends up on top and for the one that ends up submitting to the higher power.
And Jordan Peterson made this point a while ago.
And so because of that, the animals develop this kind of ritualized version of a conflict, which looks like a fight, but isn't complete, reduces the cost towards something like meaning. And we're going to use the word meaning for now. We could use other words, but purpose, maybe we could say, is a good way to think about it. As you move towards purpose and meaning, and as you kind of encompass, the reason why the fight is there in the first place, then you can ritualize it in order to avoid the cost, all right? So you can understand.
Now, it's also helpful to know that, let's say, the wolf can't articulate the meaning of the ritual. But yet that doesn't mean the ritual isn't working in the wolf pack.
Again, more conflation here. Birds have mating displays, yes, but they don't have weddings.
If you ask the child about the recipe that they got from their parent, the child might not be able to say why the parent did it that way, besides this is the way they always did it, and it works. And so this business about ritual touches on the fact that meaning and knowledge and practice, we struggle for the words, craft, excellence can be transmitted without the conscious explanation. And that's really important to think about, because again, we're so surrounded by ritual and all of these things that the conscious explanation might be lost for a very long time. And this is where you sort of get into Chesterton's fence. It's the same idea.
Understand how that is true for going to the river, as it's especially true for animals that will ritualize fighting behavior, or animals that will ritualize a type of mating behavior as well, which is that the animal will have certain type of dance or certain type of colors that will make the choice of a mate less costly than it would if those things weren't there. Like I said, all aspects of behavior are ritualized. They're just different levels of ritual. So you could understand that if you extend that into the human sphere, then you can see how we, of course, do the same, which is that, we've developed shortcuts of meaning in order to avoid the cost of something. So a good example is when you meet someone, we shake hands, we look into each other's eyes. We have found ways in order to encounter someone in a manner that cuts to the chase, right? Gets to the meaning of it, which is that we're meeting, we're not in conflict. We recognize that there's a kind of peace between us. There's a certain level of communion, and so we've ritualized that in a type of behavior, shaking hands, all the other ones that we have, which reduce the cost of figuring out, who this person is, what it is that they want from me, trying to move around, asking questions. I don't know what type of other types of behavior could exist in order to figure out the intentions of the person in front of you. But
okay, but here's the thing. You still haven't explained how the most sacred, popular, the most pervasive ritual in all of Western civilization, the Mass, is a shortcut. And I don't think you're going to get there with this line of thinking. It is not a shortcut. It is a way of smoothing over doctrinal differences. And I think that's why, frankly, there are so many different denominations, Protestant denominations, because when you remove the liturgy and you remove the Mass, then there's nothing else to define you. You're not participating in a central ritual, and and using that as your definition. So when you shave that off, the only thing left to define you is your doctrinal positions. And I think the solution to the doctrinal differences between the various types of Protestants and to cease divisions within Protestant denominations is actually more ritual. I think that would solve those problems, but the issue there is that ritual, Protestants look askance at the very rituals that can save them. Now, at this point, I think that Matt Rossano would differ from, so I want to make this clear, this is not a scientific position, this is a religious position. And I don't think this would be a shock to say that this is my religious position, because I am, after all, a priest. But I believe that Jesus knows these things. I believe that he knew these things, and I think that's what he was getting at in John 6:52 through 58. I think that's why he said, unless you drink the blood and eat the flesh of the Son of God, you have no life in you. Because he knew that we need to have the rituals, and that if we don't perform them, then we're not going to have sufficient social capital to carry us through. And that if we take out the ritual, then all we have left is doctrine. And that's not enough to feed us and to keep us united. So I believe that in no uncertain terms.
In a realm of combinatorial explosiveness, ritual shrinks the world down into manageable size. And once we can master a ritual and engage in the ritual with each other, then suddenly we can be far more effective. And as Jonathan said, it's far less work to manage our world.
you can imagine that these types of behaviors, shaking hands and all this, was chosen out of a set of possible behaviors that were maybe a little more costly. Okay, and so as you move towards more and more contracted behavior, what you do is you move towards something like meaning. And so what happens in that type of behavior is...
So the meaning of Peter Hitchens standing up was, I actively dislike you. That was the meaning of that. Now, it wasn't evident immediately. Words were important. If, let's say, they didn't have words available to them, then you'd be reading facial features and you'd be reading all of this, and maybe he's having a digestive moment, or maybe he's got back pain, or maybe sitting too long hurts him, or something like that. But yeah, we're surrounded by ritual.
Is that what happens in religious rituals, especially those that we consider religious, is that the meaning becomes more and more compressed and more pure, more and more crystallized, which is that, if there's a manner in which, let's say, we eat together as a people, and so we come together, we eat together, and what that does is it binds us together as a people. We notice that if we eat in a certain manner together, if we sit together around a table or whatever, there are multiple ways to do it, but if we aim towards that purpose, there's a limited amount of ways that we can do it, that it binds us together, that it makes us also share in the food, makes us share in the identity, makes us recognize each other as one, for example. Then we realize that, wait a minute, if I can scale that up, and so if I meet together with my family or with a friend and I eat, that does something. But if I have like a banquet at the city, or a marriage banquet where we all kind of come together, or some ritual where it's a bigger meeting. Let's say we have a banquet to celebrate, the 30th anniversary or the 100th anniversary of a city. Then all of a sudden we realize that this type of behavior, these ritualizations of ceremonies of coming together, bind us together towards higher purposes. And so you can understand then at some point people
Okay. Remember I said before that this stuff isn't necessarily conscious. It's in our guts, sort of like lying on Survivor. And that's where, of course, this gets complex, because on one hand, part of what Jordan Peterson sort of cracked open, and John Vervaeke certainly has pursued it, and Jonathan has, is we are bringing to awareness, to intellectual awareness, to propositional awareness, some of the dynamics of these rituals that have gone on for a very long time, that people have participated in. And now we have a better understanding of why they work, let's say, and why they work towards ends that we desire. But they also, it's being done in a context where, for many people, they have stopped working. I made a video a while ago about from ready for harvest, when they had that video on the Orthodox Church, and it talked about the Orthodox Church is in an interesting place because via conversions they are growing, but via defections from immigrants that produce a large number of their people, they are shrinking. And when it gets into the question of de-churching, of people leaving the faith, this gets very interesting, because if we look at the Enlightenment critique and say these rituals are arbitrary, a lot of the work done in this little corner has been, no, they're not arbitrary at all.
No, they're not arbitrary at all. I like what Jonathan Pajot says here. He's using metaphorical language to express how religion builds social capital. And Paul, I think that you raise an interesting question. Why are rituals losing their hold? And I actually think that the reason for that is fakeness. And I'm going to make a longer video about this, but I actually believe that what happens in modern society is that people who are fed by ritual, maybe in the old world or in foreign countries, and then they come to the United States, then they're bombarded by fakeness. And so they're bombarded by fake news. They're bombarded by fake sex, porn, by fake adventure, that is virtual reality, movies, and so on. Fake achievements, video games, and so on. Fake community, in other words, social media and everything that goes with it. And I think that these fake things bond to the same centers that the real deal should occupy. And when it does that, they become immune to the benefits of the ritual. And so it's already bonded to that center. And it's the same way as fake food satisfies hunger for real food. So in other words, if you stop and grab a burger, that's easy, it's fake, it's not real food, you grab it, and depending upon the quality of it, we won't debate what bad fake food is, but so you grab this food and then you have no appetite for real nutrition. And so, in the same way that, let's say, someone who does cocaine repeatedly, the pleasure centers of the brain have been desensitized. And so the entire world becomes gray. The same dopamine hit that they would get, the rush of excitement they would get from seeing the face of a friend by surprise, seeing their face of their lover in the morning, a delicious bite of food, a beautiful sunset, all of that can't get through. And the world becomes gray. And then soon the only thing that gives that elation and that joy is the cocaine, the fake endorphin. And so that's why I think that rituals in the modern day have lost their power, because the centers that they act upon are taken up by the fake and by the false. And I believe that that's actually the work of the devil, because the devil is the father of lies. And so it should surprise no one that fake news, fake sex, fake adventure, fake accomplishment, and fake community would be the downfall of the religious life. I could break down the rest of this video. I could go further, but I think that's a nice launching off point. And I invite Jonathan or Paul or both to have me on a call and for us to talk about this stuff in some more detail. And, Paul, I sent you copies of these books. I did. And I don't know if you read them yet or if you just read them and they didn't impress upon you their full meaning. But I encourage you to get them off the bookshelf and to give them a read. I've read this book through, I'm sure, 5 or 6 times. Here are all my tabs. It had a profound, profound effect upon me. And it impressed upon me the centrality of religion to the human experience. And I want to close and give credit where credit's due to Dr. Matt Rossano. The final lines of his book are as follows. If we abandon ritual, do we give up something of our humanity? No, it is much simpler than that. If we abandon ritual, we give up being human. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.